All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. This session, and I'm glad to have the first session of the day. This session is searching event logs like a boss. I am Phil Bossman, so that, it's the best little pun you'll get, and I'm very sorry for it. So certainly want to thank the sponsors we currently have, System Frontier and everybody else. So that's your generic slide. Who I am Phil Bossman. I end user computing architect. Basically what it means is I manage applications and delivery of applications across an environment. Citrix, AD, VMware, and stuff like that. Been using PowerShell for many years, since V2. Also the co-leader of the PowerShell user group. Kind of you heard some of that thing. I'm also super excited. I'm going to do a chapter in the PowerShell conference book, and we're super excited. They'll be raffled off this afternoon too as well. So 2 copies will be raffled off this afternoon. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Schlog. There's a website, schlog.com. I don't really tweet. I don't really blog very often. Mike's trying to get me to do that more often because he's a big blogger. But we'll talk about that later. So let's get into the content, because we don't really. That's the next slide. Is hey, let's talk about content. Let's get into the weeds.
Working.
So here we go. Oh, I don't want that back. Let's go to. This is where we want to be, VS Code. All right, so event logs. Everybody's working with Windows event logs at this point. Now that PowerShell is core and can go across plat, we're talking about Windows event logs, okay? A brief history at this point is whenever you're working with PowerShell at this point, everybody should know, oh, am I not screening that? Oh, you know what? That's why. I'm sorry, you guys gotta tell me that I'm not showing my screen.
You're showing a slide.
Yeah. I need to exit the presentation. There we go. Everybody sees that, right? There you go. Much better. Sorry about that. Okay, so if you're fairly new to PowerShell or you're not doing it already, you should be using GetHelp. Okay, so what's GetHelp and why is it all important? Is basically gives you a bunch of information, and I like with show window because it will. You can do searching. You can do search and get the parameters, get examples and such. So first thing is when you're in V2, so if you're who's using legacy code, basically old stuff. I still manage, 2008 R2 servers, and yes, it's kind of awful, but I do. At that point, you only have access to GetHelp. Is to get event log. Okay, so this is the world that you're going to live in at that point. So the reason I point that out is when there are certain things that you can do with get event log, and which are limited when you move on later. Okay, so again, kind of what is the event log? Event log is the dumping information where Microsoft puts all its information into events, and all of the relevant application events. We go at that point. So you have application services. Yeah. So get event log. You can hear all the available parameters to you. There is also on a way to get you the newest before computer name. You can reference a remote computer as well. And what does it look like inside of Citrix? Inside. Come on, there you go. I made this bigger. So this is the same thing you normally see when you're looking at the event logs, but this is PowerShell, and you're going to probably hear me say that multiple times. This is PowerShell. So what does that mean? We need to feel the power and use the power of the shell. That's my term. Is use the power of the shell. So we have basically a bunch of columns. Well, that's kind of similar to what we kind of see here when we open the log here. We have all these different parts that we can look at, and it's pretty much the same. So what's the value at that point? Well, effectively, these are all individual objects. So you can select out the newest one. You can then pass in parameters like give me all the ones that are this particular ID. You can still do some of that filtering inside the GUI version, but the value is that I can do this on a machine, and I can then, hey, dump this to an Excel file. I can dump this to a CSV, and I can then parse it. Okay? So what we looked at before with the parameters, you can reference remote computers. So here we're just going to, in my lab, we're just using localhost. You can define the log type. Okay, the type, there's system log, we want just the information, and then we want the newest 20. Oh, I don't want just that. There we go. There you go. Just first 20 of that information log. But the point is, we're going to use PowerShell to our unit. This is PowerShell. So, hey, give me the application log, okay? But there's no reason why I couldn't throw in other PowerShell code inside of your other working process. Like, I want after a date. Well, the system itself, it has to say, give me this particular date. Well, I can dynamically generate that date by something else, by some other PowerShell code. So give me the date, let me go back a couple hours, and that's the date I want to start at. And then the reverse, hey, before that date, well, give me this, and I'm going to jump ahead 11 hours. So you can do that, this process, and there we go. And so here it is, back 1 hour plus 11 hours. Now I was just doing this just so I get everything today. But again, here we go with PowerShell. This is, if you haven't been working with PowerShell very long, there's something called splatting involved. So you can, instead of having this long single line that runs into multiple lines with all of my parameters, you can then very easily format all those parameters into a hash table, and then this term is called splatting. So I take this into a hash table, then stick it in there, and then this, oops, shoot, scrolled too far. This whole piece is roughly the exact same, keep getting it wrong, is the same thing. So give me the log name. I can infer, again, we didn't do an add and remove at this point, but I can just define a particular date and give me the first 20. So you can take some of those parameters and put it that way from there. So GetMember. So I briefly talked about before is that when you're working with PowerShell, they're all coming back. It's not just line items. It's not it's not a table. It's not a table of text. It's actually inferred objects. It's full objects that are instantiated. They have methods, they have properties, and they have script properties as well. And so you can get the type, you can get that. But here's all the properties that we normally see in table form. And so the reason we do that is so that we can then use the data later on. When inside the get event log, one of the downsides or limitations of get event log is you're only limited to the canned stuff that's inside of only the stuff listed right here is what get event log. So later on we'll get to it, so we can get into all of this advanced stuff down here, and that will come later on when we move to the next command line. So get event log. So you can get any one of these if you just get the log and then list all the logs, so you can figure out what logs are available to you. It also gives you a count and how many entries are in there. So how big it is, and then how many entries. Of course, security is huge, but there are events for PowerShell itself. So PowerShell is logging your system. But so here's another example using get event log this is PowerShell. Okay, so I'm going to just walk through this really quickly in the form of that. In the old way, we're going to use the pipeline. So give me all the logs. Okay, everything in the event log, everything in the application event log. Okay, I'm going to then group them by event ID. So now I take it all, and I'm going to put it into groups. And then, well, what do I get at this point? Don't do that. So I can then group them all, and then I want to, for all the count, then I'm going to name, I'm going to figure out what the source is, and I'm going to figure out, and I'm going to uniquely join all the groups together, and then I'm going to sort it. So what are we going to get here? And then we'll explain what we got. So what is this doing? So I got everything out of the event application log, okay, and for every ID in there, figured out what sources there are. So that's really what we're doing here. So grouping everything by ID, so I'm counting all the IDs. Counting all the IDs, then I get the count, the name, and then I dynamically generate what source they came from. So that may be information that we kind of see. So there are 2,200 and 2,100 101 events or 1,001 events. Some are error reporting and some are Microsoft load performance. So that can be valuable when you're working later on. And I think yeah, we're good. So that is kind of quote unquote the old way. And so I wanted to start off there is that if you're dealing with the effective old way of doing it is because if you still with 2008 R2 servers or you don't PowerShell 2, that's the limitation of what you have. So you still have a lot of power, but it really that's really all you can do. You do some piping, you can do some organization, you can do some sorting, that's what you can do with it. So if you move to PowerShell 3 and you move to everything above that, okay, that we can go to, you don't have older servers, you can get a new command link called GetWhenEvent. That was released. So GetWhenEvent is the newer version of PowerShell's event log tracker. Okay, so you still have the normal things we talked about. Actually, I think I look at it here. So the available parameters to you are you have more parameter sets itself, the term's called. So you can get it based upon log name. You can list all the logs available to you. There's something called the provider. So based upon the provider set that's there, you can list them there. You can list the providers. You can then also, I want to get some data based upon a hash table. I want to give GetWhenEvent a hash table, you know, kind of like we did the splatting thing, but give it a hash table and then go get me my events based upon that. You can also create an XML and do that. And then you can actually define the path itself. And so we'll get to some of those other things. So the path is, I want to basically save this event log itself. So the entire EVTX file that it's generating, that's gathered, you can move it over to somewhere else, you can save it to something else, and then now you can then reference it and use GetWhenEvent to actually parse that information. So just like we did before, this looks fairly similar to the output of GetEventLog, but you notice slightly different because it then groups all the events by their provider name. So you can kind of see, hey, I have so many of these events and those events in that regard. And anybody stop me, you know, if I'm just rambling and want to talk at that point. So if you have any questions, let me know. So we looked at GetEventLog before. Those document types, there are more properties excuse me, available to us with GetWhenEvent. It's a richer object type. So it's actually called an event record. And so it actually has its own parts, and we'll get to XML pretty soon. And that's really one of the powers of it. One of the other things, a limitation of GetEventLog, we talked before, but one of the reasons why I enjoy GetWhenEvent is that you can actually pass in a credential object to GetWhenEvent and go reference somebody else's event log remotely using a particular credential or even locally itself. So I run my machine as my regular account. I don't let my regular account have admin rights on my own machine, but if I need to reference even my own computer or another computer's event log, I can then pass in an admin credential to GetWhenEvent, and then now I can reference those and all stay within a confined space. So just as easy, I can pass in the credential, and then I can go get the events basically at that point. So it allows me to then, in a limited form, go use that information, even on remote machines that I don't currently have at this point. We talked before about what event logs are available to us. By using GetEvent, you actually have access to all the extended event logs that are out there, assuming that there's data in them. And the other point is that you can save out your system log, or you can save out the logs themselves. So here's an example of actually, I took the event logs from another machine, from some random client, and I put them here, and then I can then reference that person's event log and use at that point. We don't really need to talk, or you can. Last session, somebody asked me about scrub data, and so a lot of the things that you're going to see here is I wasn't going to generate an entire lab and build some generic stuff. So this is real data, and I created a function called scrub data, and it just dumps out all my stuff. So I can present it. And so that's a dynamically. So yeah, question.
There was a program event dwr.exe.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do?
Where's DWR?
Event VWR.
Event viewer.
Oh, okay.
That's the event viewer.
Okay.
Sorry.
Gotcha.
That is the.
That opens up the dialog.
That's opens this.
Gotcha.
That's what this is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Event viewer.exe. Sorry. Okay. So we talked. I'm not going to repurpose the idea that all of the same PowerShell functionality that you get before when you're working with get event log, you can start piping, you can pass in particular parameters, but now what else can we do at this point? So one of the available parameters is hash table. So we kind of talked about. But here's some potential properties that you can pass into a hash table and get individually. I can pass in a log name, path, all these particular variables into a hash table. So I want the provider name is PowerShell, maybe, and then I want all of these particular event IDs. So using that same fashion, I keep hitting F9. So, and I also stuck it into a variable. So what value is that? Well, let's actually look at that. I don't remember what's inside that. So here is all the event logs. So individually. So you can then generate or get the values from somewhere else. You can generate the hash table and pull the parts out you need. Again, not again, but the idea that we can then use that information, I dump it to a variable, take that variable, pass it into a select, and then I can parse out the different pieces. I can then throw it into out grid view if nobody's ever seen that before. So now at this point here's all the events that are available to me. If you also don't work with get event view, so there is a thing called get event view or out grid view. All right, I keep saying event. So out grid view. So now, hey, I only want events with 300. Yeah, these look like the events I'm looking for. So then you go to highlight them, and then you click OK, and you pass them through. And what got dumped out was just those two items. So using the power of the shell allows, and there's a lot of other commandlets available to you. So that's also a kind of gem that people have asked me about before when I've presented this talk before, is out grid view. So you can do some of that kind of stuff, and you can run a script or you can build a script that you then give to other people. And hey, now this little script that you did is now a GUI-fied version, and that's the kind of information you're looking for.
So what's your expression doing? Is it getting rid of carriage returns or something? The split?
So this is actually, it's getting rid of all the, yes. So it's getting me the first one. It's splitting on the carriage returns.
Okay.
And then just putting them all together. And actually it's only in the first one, yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep. Get a WIT event provider. All right. So provider listing. So I think I kind of talked about it before. These are all the different provider types. What a provider is when you go look inside the event log. Let's go back up here. Main controller. I'm trying to think of. So a provider is like a template for an event. And so there is a way in which you can pass, or that the event log itself. I'm trying to think of here, how does that? There you go, that's a good example. So in this fashion, get everything where there is a principal name, go give me all the group policy events, where give me all those events, where there's a principal name, and then figure out what their ID and description is. So if you're looking for an event that sometimes when people search event logs, they go, hey, I want to go give me all the event logs where the message equals all this other stuff. And then you're doing all this regex parsing to try and figure out, well, if it's not this, and then now I'm trying to combine because it's a message, it's like 5 lines long, I need something from line 12, and I need something from line 2. That becomes cumbersome. And effectively, it's just formatting because these provider types. And so you can kind of see in here, it is variables that are putting into the string. So this is just kind of a good example. It's all one line, and there are variables in line. So you can kind of see that it's just some variable structure inside of that. And it kind of gave me the idea of going, well, there's more data there that I want to get back out.
How did you get that again? How did you get the output there?
So getting all the event,
Okay.
give the provider, and then select out the events from the event log provider, and then pass it to, in this fashion, I said, I only want, again, get everything in that provider, but then where there is a property, where there is a template with a principal name, so you'll see later on where I'm looking for particular types of events, and that I only want that where the principal username is there. And so then I can figure out which one I'm looking for. This is, doesn't really practical in this fashion, but I'll get to some more practical applications later. All right, so get event. So here's a good practical example of, hey, you're looking at event login. There's a bunch of errors. Well, are these real errors, and what are these errors for? It looks like, when we did an Office 2013 to 2019 upgrade, there are a bunch of errors that threw up in the event log. So is it a problem? Is it not a problem? So I get them all, and yeah, out variable. There you go. So if you also, so again, each item is just a parameter at this point. And what's it type? Error log. But we also, because it is a event record type, we looked before, we have a bunch of methods available to us. One of those methods is toXML. Now, everybody, if anybody likes XML, I can take you out back and whip you, So, but it can be valuable in some fashion. But see, now I have this object that is effectively an XML. And so I can then traverse the entire XML tree, and then, hey, I got data inside of here. I got types that I can work with in this tree. And there's the binary parts. I have all the pieces I'm looking for, but now I can then use PowerShell to then go get me the parts that I'm looking for. And so this is going to get a little bit complicated, but it might be easy to just walk through. So take all those events, pass them into the pipeline. If you're unfamiliar with PowerShell 2, this is a for each. I probably should have forgot to come in here. Swap it for just for each. That's what that variable is for. So for every event, I'm going to then create an XML object from it, and then I'm going to create a custom PS object. I'm going to create my own object based upon what that object is. And so where it's an object that has 5 properties: the event ID, the time it was created, the app ID, the GUID, the GUID, and then the error code that was in there. So now, effectively, I'm creating my own new object that has just the parts I want, and just the fields I want, and just the data I want from that. So before, we had this message type that had a bunch of stuff. So hey, I got this product and this big old string, but I didn't want all that string, and I wouldn't do all this, hey, formatting and pulling this part out, pulling that. I didn't need to do that. I could then create an XML object in the middle, then pull out the parts I'm looking for, and then pass it on so I can then use it later on. And so that's what I now have in that fashion. So again, I now have individual. I can then take this CSV, I can then dump it to something else, or that kind of stuff. It just goes down the pipe. Next thing we're going to look at. So when you're working with event logs, let's just open an event. Or there is not very few. There are some people who just look at event logs like this, in this fashion. But there's this thing called, hey, over here it's called details pane. So this is like the friendly view, but there's something called an XML view. So every event in an event log actually is nothing more than a construct of an XML. Okay? But also, when I looked at this the first time, I was like, it's XML. I know how to get XML. I can work with this. So now I can get the XML back and I can then use it later on. Oh, that was the other thing. So now when you're here, a lot of people have seen, hey, filter event log. And hey, we click on these GUIs. Hey, I want the criticals, I want the errors. The event ID is 1001. Yeah, that works. Do I get anything? Nope, I didn't get anything. It was the system ones, event 01. Okay, we'll just do 7036, right? We can do all that kind of stuff. I want to say, hey, over the last couple days, within a date range, hey, these are the kind of GUI things. But where's the PowerShell? I want to do this in automation. I want to do this repeatably. I don't want to work with this GUI if I have to do it this way and another way and another way. But there's also this thing way up here. It's called XML. Hey, so as I inject stuff into this console, where the last 7 days, it's now generating an XML filter. That's exactly what this is doing. So it's generating an XML filter for you, okay? And then it's filtering the event log based upon that. Okay, now granted, nothing returned back from that event log, that type, because I'm doing just those. Hey, there's our divide items again. Sorry. So at this point, we're getting that kind of stuff. And, well, I can also dynamically edit this query, and I can go copy this code out. So I can use the GUI to build the parts that I need, and then I can go stick it into PowerShell. And that's kind of what we're going to do in just a second. So I created my filter, and I copied it from the event viewer itself, and I just stuck it in here. And I created, if you're unfamiliar with this as well, this is called a Earstring. You can create a string that is multiple lines long, okay? And the only requirement is that it has to, the last line of the first part has to start with an at quote or double quote, single quote or double quote. And then this has to be on the very left side. So if I put all this here, it's still the Earstring. It has to be the very first line. So it has to end there. You can do multiple lines and all that kind of stuff. So it can go as long as it wants, but it has to be the first character. You kind of see text highlighting at that point. So now we're kind of going off that tangent, but I can build an XML filter. You can build your XML filter. Hey, there's my canned XML, and I can use the XML filter itself. XML filter's not recognized. There we go. Okay. So use that kind of thing, give me everything in the last 7 days based on an event log, and so that. So yeah, that's kind of nice because I use this GUI to give me something, and then what's the point of that? But this is PowerShell. It's just a string. I want to then, this is a little bit further on. You can also use XPath. So when you're inside of here, there is this thing. It's called XPath. So XPath is a searching mechanism for searching XML documents, or searching XML at that point. So you could pass in the entire XML itself. So query list, what application, what log, here's the log, and then you're searching in the path of that log. So you could search multiple event logs all at the same time, and you can get back all at the same time. It really doesn't matter, and that's where you'd use the XML filter. Or you can actually define these parts in XPath, and if you want to go looking up XPath and how to search it, you can certainly do that. And really what we're doing here at this point is say, I want to search the system tree of the XML document itself. So I'm going to pass in an event and then use this to give me actually it starts here as SAR, basically everything, give me all search the entire event, which is just an XML document, go into the system tree, then give me where there's a flag called level equals 2, event ID 2, or that. So you can use, again, keep scrolling too far, this mouse. So that same kind of thing, and we're building at that point. But I kind of like this in that fashion because it's just XPath. I can then build this tree. You kind of see if you use the event log itself, it's going to give it to you all in one kind of chunk. But if you generate your Earstring and you put it into a readable form, it becomes nicer. I kind of led up to it earlier. It's nothing more than PowerShell, and go.
Oh, no, it's just a question. So like in your earlier version where you were doing the splat, that second example is simply just a shorter, cleaner version of what you have above it.
It may be, is it the same filter? It's close to the same
Similar
filter.
to it, I mean,
It's similar.
same concept.
Well, the first one is actually using the entire XML filter,
Okay,
and this one is just passing in path.
okay.
So yes, it's kind of the same thing.
It's
It's a
still
short.
filter XPath as
Yeah.
the parameter.
Yeah, you can pass in just the path. So excuse me, yes, you're correct. But effectively, we're dealing with strings here. We know how to inject variables into strings. We know how to add parts so that we can part. So I can then, from an external source, external to the actual filter itself, hey, I'm going to create a variable. Here's the variable I have, and I can build it on the fly. So I do this quite often in my environment. Is I'll have a generic filter, and then I will then individually select off different things. I'll have like canned, like one-liner scripts. Hey, go give me all the events for this, but I have a filter, go give me the events, but then events for whom or where, I don't really know. So I pass in a couple of variables and then pass in the computers I want to, and then it will go. So that's kind of what we're doing here. So I can dynamically, these are kind of examples of it. Your system itself can be a single name. You can actually parse a list itself. So one of the things I have in my profile is, again, XenApp servers. So when I launch it, gives me a list of all of the XenApp servers in my environment. So if somebody else adds a couple in my environment, I don't really care. It's just going to be refreshed. So then I can filter based upon that. And I know I have the current list as of when I launched PowerShell. But, okay, so we call this pre-staged work. So this is how I'm going to create. Later on, we're going to show interactive errors on machine. But the point is that I go get my list of systems. Okay, I then go get event log for that system based upon the filter that we defined before. So I want where the application is this and where that event ID is. So that's where I started, and I stick it all into events, and then I dumped it out to an error into that. So kind of how I came up with this. So now, what does this look like? So in a real environment, we then said, go give me all the interactive errors that are on a machine. Again, I work in a XenApp environment, so this is basically just those dialog boxes that, hey, something happened on the machine. This is just PowerShell. So there is the message from it. Okay, Windows cannot load the registry for a particular user. And here's the path of that user itself. But again, so in this example, that's why I'm doing this. So the point is that who's having these problems? And so because I did it across all of my servers, I came up here, I did it across all my servers, I can then say, come here and say, show me everywhere where there's an event across all my 100 servers. So I said, I got some on 54, 56, 57, 58. Well, this looks like it's a systematic problem across the environment. And so in that fashion, I've done it. I think this is the example, or maybe there's another one later on, where, hey, somebody says, hey, we're getting this app crashed. Excel's crashing every day. Like, well, there's a problem with Excel. You pushed some patch. Like, oh, okay, well, let's go find out. Well, it's happening across my environment. Well, is it happening? Well, then I do the same kind of search. Here we go. And then we're gonna format. Well, this says it's been happening since November. It's not a patch that you pushed last week, because this exact same error has been happening weekly across the environment. So not me, or it's something else, because that's typically what everybody hears on a daily basis, is that you broke it and it's not your problem to solve. Let's use PowerShell to tell me that it's not me.
Exonerated by PowerShell.
Exonerated by PowerShell, exactly. Get my events.
Still could be you, just earlier.
Yeah. So what's this look like? Account's fully logged on. Here we go, same kind of. So we're still working that same, that you can get other events. Why did I want to get this event? Why did I close this? Oh, we're dealing with XML itself. So this is kind of another example of that same kind of parts. And because we're dealing with event parts, is that there is a method in which to actually pull out this hash table. So here's my hash table of individual parts. So if you needed to get the event type data out of the event log, okay, you need to do some really clean and effective XML parsing, and nobody likes that. And so, but you do it once, and that's really what we're doing. So give me the event ID, the data, the entry in that table, in that table, and then just where that type is. So now, using that same filter, I now can, who is the user, the login process, when that happened. That's not a really good example at that point. But this is how you would then parse the event type data, the event data inside those XML. So this is what it looks like to part. Now, again, it's not pretty, but it's PowerShell. You write it once. I don't care anymore. There's a script for that. Don't really care. And that's the power of the show. This, again, power of the shell. Here we are for all the event records we have. We then loop through them, and we're going to do a count, who has more, and that kind of stuff. So, again, you just play the game of writing your script. And I think I generated a count. Actually, yeah, we'll skip over that. Can't remember right now why. Why did I add a property? Oh, I added the property I created the instance. At this point, I created the types. So now this is a list item of it. So out grid view. So here's that exact same thing and just turned up on its side. So it's kind of like transpose in Excel. So it was a hash table this way. I then put it that way. So that's what this part is. So now I can then, it is now, instead of a vertical hash table, it is now horizontal, and now I can use out grid view, and I can do my sorting at that point with it. So, don't grab that. I want to scroll. I'm on number 6. Should be on number 6. All right, where are we? 21 minutes. Good. 20 minutes. Good to go. All right. So, any questions? I know I'm jumping all over the place. I'm using a lot of generic code. Yep, sir.
I have a specific requirement. I want to figure out when I log in on my computer in the morning and when I log out in the evening for time entry.
Yep.
How would you solve that problem?
So in that fashion, there is an event log ID that is the interactive login, and there's an interactive log off. I want to say it's 4001 and 4004, something like that. It's somewhere in that. So search the event logs in that time range, and then it's also in the system key. And then at that point, now you have that data, and just run a script, and you can just pull it back out. So
is it possible you have to?
So let me get to that, because you're actually gonna. I just realized number 7 is find event log data, event logon data, and so I actually use that later on. So we'll get to it just a little bit. What are we doing here? Oh, so here's the example that I was talking about before. With hey, again, Citrix RDS. That's the world I live in. Somebody says, hey, the web app logon servers. Grid view. What are we going to get here? So this tells me, I then pulled it back out. Hey, what my user ID is, who's logged in, and what their session is. So in the RDS world, I want to know what their client ID is and that part. So I can just as well give me that data. Why I did that is for the log for a particular time. Application events ID. So in that same fashion, at this point, you can define an external app server itself using live data. here's the example of app errors. So in our ERP application, hey, something's happening, you push the patch to Excel, and now Excel is crashing our ERP app. It is? Yeah, there's 7,000 times. Holy sheesh. Or, excuse me, I was about to curse. But yeah, well, what's it look like? Oh yeah, see, Excel's crashing. Oh, damn. Like, what am I gonna do with this? All right, so, well, it's just event errors itself. Well, where the message doesn't have Excel in it. Well, is other things crashing too? Yeah, other things are crashing on the server too. So it's maybe not just Excel. All right, well, how many, where it is Excel? Oh, well, of that 7,000, it's 684. Oh, it's a pretty high percentage of what it is. So kind of in this fashion, very quickly and very effectively, I can then, hey, how many is it happening? Is it happening? I can use the same magic, and I've done it many times, is that, hey, it's happening. Well then, let me build this quick little filter, let me apply it to all these computers, and then it comes back and all of a sudden, well, it's only happening on the 01 server. Well, it's only happening on the 7 server. Now we need to figure out what's wrong with that one, as opposed to it's across the board. All right? So now let's do this. So what are we doing? Event logs, where the message is like Excel, sort by time, descending, and I'm going to select just the time, the machine, and what machine it happened on, and only give me the last 20, just so I don't get everything. Well, this tells me that the last time it happened, it was only happening on 56, and here it is, the last 20. But actually, let's drop off the last 20. But holy crap, it's happening all over the place. Like, all right, so this is potentially something to look at because it's happening. But also, you kind of see that it's been happening forever in a month. Oh, that's why I said descending, because it's been happening for forever in a month. So it's not me. And so we need to go look at something else, or tell me more about what's crashing, and then we can investigate that, not just say, hey, your patch broke my machine. So that's why the last 20 just give sort descending, but very quickly and very effectively, we can then use PowerShell to do this at scale. So searching like a boss. When you're dealing with the system and logon events, so we kind of talked about at that point, one of the things that you need from a logon event. So actually, when I need 7001.
Probably in the security log.
System log, filter, 7001. So here's your logon event, saying that this person, well, this is a logon event for this thing, the details. So if we're looking at that point, all right, what is available to me? So here is the UID of this, here's the SID of the user who actually did a logon. Okay, so there's my 7001, the logon event, and I think there's a log off event, and we'll get to that in a second. So here's my win logon, and then there's a log off later. We're gonna get, I think we'll get to it. But in this fashion, I need to build my XPath using the user's SID. So I just use some other magic later on. This is PowerShell. Get AD user, where identity is my SAM account name. Go give me the SID property. All right, stick that in a variable, stick that back into my XPath, and now I have a way in which I can, hey, across, server 51 through 60, append that number to the end. Now I have a list of servers. Then get one event across all my servers using that XPath, the system log, stick it into a variable at the end, and now very quickly, very effectively, I can go across all my servers, and that's who's logged in. Do this. Yeah, no. So I did an example of this with live data somewhere. I don't see the code here. Maybe I pulled it out when I was messing with this last night. Never mess with your demonstration at night.
Well, if you're demoing in the morning when nobody's there.
This is the first session of the day, so you guys get high quality presentations. All right, anyway, you can kind of see at this point really what's happening here. So that whole idea, hey, I can then take my data, sort by that time, give me the last 30 of where somebody logged in, and make it at that point. And so this is just login information. I know I have, where's my live data? Oh, here, app user. There it is. Rehydrate. There's my user. So that's what I was looking for. So using that same kind of piece. So where did I build the piece? So what you're looking for right here,
Yeah.
basically, this code will be available to us afterwards. So it'll be up on GitHub. So you can just steal the code right from here. Yeah, so the code will be here. No worries. So I build the XPath for each server. Build the XPath based upon the SID that I'm passing in. Okay, so I'm gonna, what user ID I want to use, so then I can pass in the SID. I define what the computer name, just so I can use it, write verbose, get the event log, and slow me down if anybody needs to, okay? Because I feel like I'm running fast.
How did you get username from SID? How did you get SID from username?
The SID is a property of a user object in AD. There's a lot of ways you can search for it across, and there's a lot of ways to get it. PS get SID, it's if you need it really, but then you got to do some string parsing. But there's a lot of ways to get it if you don't have the AD commandlets available to you on the machine that you're working from. Okay. Scroll down. So we don't really need that part at this point. So get event computer, where the computer that we passed in with the XPath only give me the first 150. So it would just sit there and churn. So one of the things I don't need, for that long. So just give me the first 150. Then for each event, I'm going to then create my own object. Okay. So I create a property just called log on, log off. But now, if the ID of the event that I'm passing in is 7001, well, that's a login event. And so I tag it with the time created. And if it's a log off, I tag it with time logged off. And then I create this object that is my username, computer name, the time itself, and then whichever login. So what's the output look like? You can kind of see it at this point.
And what does T-object do?
Oh, T-object. So T-object. I'm trying to think of where I'm using it.
That's a little bit lower.
Oh, T-object. Actually, the reason why it came out on the screen is because it sends it to a variable and then keeps it down the pipeline. It's a T. So with T-object, so you can do, but T-object, you can do multiple types. I want to where my input variable is, but I can send it out to a file path. You can do some logging. You can dump the object right to a log file and then let it keep going. So you can get it midstream along the line. And so I use it quite often. What?
It literally tees it up.
Thinking through the pipeline.
Yeah.
So the pipeline's it's a chain,
Yeah.
but I want to then divert it somewhere else, and then put it down the pipeline again. So it's that T.
Okay.
Okay. So this is what our output gets. So effectively, we now have tell me my username, computer, and this person on off has logged into all these servers. This is the time when the either a log on or log off event happened. But now here's his log on, log off, log on, log off. And so effectively, this is exactly what you're looking for.
So if you do analytics, can you? It's a little bit outside the scope of this, but how do you get the first and the last? How do you get the first log on and the last log off in the day? In a day, assuming you're only working.
Well, we talk after about what ideas, because there's a lot of ways to do such thing like that. So we're running out of time, and we're actually out of time. And same kind of thing. So you could build things like this based upon event logs, and this is your magic. And thanks for coming. If you have any other questions afterward, please let me know, and we'll be happy to help.